cultures intertwined and faiths clashed. The Reconquista, the long and dramatic effort to reclaim these lands from Moorish rule, was more than just a war. It was a journey shaped by countless struggles, small victories, and heartbreaking defeats. A slow, deliberate process that reshaped not just kingdoms, but the hearts and minds of the people who lived through it. From 711 AD, when the Moors first set foot in Iberia, to 1492, when the last Muslim stronghold in Granada fell, this was a conflict that defined an era. The Reconquista was not merely a battle for land, but for identity. As historian Brian Catlos eloquently said, the Reconquista was not merely a struggle for territory, but for identity, religion, and culture in medieval Europe. Christian forces were not just reclaiming territory, they were reclaiming their faith, their culture, and a sense of belonging. The ebb and flow of the struggle reflected the complexity of medieval life, where alliances shifted and enemies sometimes became uneasy neighbours. In this video, we'll explore the key moments that define the Reconquista, tracing its long and winding road from the earliest Moorish invasions to the final Christian victory in Granada. We'll look at the small Christian kingdoms in the north, how they resisted against all odds, and the moments that shifted the balance of power. From heroic battles to intricate political manoeuvring, the Reconquista was a journey as much as it was a war. Welcome to the ASMR History Hub, where I bring you peaceful, immersive storytelling from the past. Today, we will embark on a fascinating journey through the Reconquista, exploring the epic conflict that spanned centuries and shaped the future of Spain and Portugal. So sit back, relax, and let history gently unfold as I guide you through one of the most captivating periods of medieval Europe. Before we dive into the Christian reconquest, we must first travel back to where it all began. In the year 711, the Moors crossed into Iberia, igniting a chain of events that would forever change the landscape of the peninsula. Let's now take a closer look at the Moorish conquest of Iberia, the spark that set the stage for nearly 8 centuries of struggle. In the year 711 AD, a dramatic shift took place on the Iberian Peninsula, one that would forever alter the course of its history. A land that had once been ruled by the Visigoths, a people who had inherited the legacy of the Roman Empire, was suddenly plunged into chaos. The Visigothic kingdom, a realm already weakened by internal divisions and political strife, faced a challenge unlike anything it had ever seen before. For decades, the kingdom had been plagued by factionalism. Noble families vied for power, and the throne had become the subject of bitter disputes. As historian Roger Collins noted, the Visigothic state had been rent by civil war, its cohesion shattered by factionalism. It was in this fractured landscape that an opportunity arose for the Moors, a Muslim force from North Africa, to stake their claim on Iberian soil. The key to their entry, a man named Count Julian, a disgruntled Visigothic noble who would invite a foreign power Some say he sought revenge against King Roderick, the Visigothic ruler, while others claim he merely saw an opportunity to exploit the kingdom's weakened state. Whatever the true reason, Count Julian's invitation brought the Muslim general Tariq Ibn Ziyad and his army across the Strait of Gibraltar, where they landed on the Iberian Peninsula. Little did the Visigoths know that this small invasion force would soon snowball into a full-scale conquest. Tariq Ibn Ziyad was no ordinary general. A skilled and charismatic leader, he knew that swift and decisive action was the key to victory. His army, composed of Berbers and Arabs, moved quickly through southern Iberia, taking advantage of the fractured Visigothic defences. The heart of the Visigothic kingdom was vulnerable, and the Muslim invaders capitalised on this weakness with precision. One of the defining moments of this conquest came at the Battle of Guadalete, a battle that would echo through the centuries as a turning point in Iberian history. In the hot summer of 711 AD, King Roderick led his forces to face Tariq's army on the battlefield. It was a desperate effort to protect what remained of Visigothic power, but it was not enough. Tariq's forces, fueled by their momentum and their sense of purpose, overwhelmed the Visigoths. As the dust settled, King Roderick lay dead, his forces decimated. The historian Edward Gibbon would later write, "Roderick fell, and with him the kingdom of the Goths was no more." With the fall of Roderick and the defeat of the Visigoths at Guadalete, the door into the Iberian Peninsula was wide open for the Moors. Towns and cities fell in rapid succession. Seville, Cordoba, and Toledo, the former Visigothic capital, were all taken by the Muslim forces. The speed of the conquest was astonishing, and within just a few years, the Moors controlled much of Iberia. The Visigothic kingdom, once a dominant force in the region, had all but collapsed under the weight of this foreign invasion. But the conquest was more than just a military campaign. It marked the beginning of a new era in Iberia, one where Islamic culture, religion, and governance would leave an indelible mark on the land. Under Muslim rule, the region would soon become known for its flourishing culture, its advancements in science, and its tolerance for the diverse populations that called it home. The cities of Al-Andalus, as the Moors called their new territory, would rise to prominence, becoming centres of learning and commerce that attracted scholars and traders from across the Mediterranean world. Yet, even as the Moors solidified their control over Iberia, the seeds of resistance were quietly being sown. Far to the north, in the rugged mountains of Asturias, a small group of Christian nobles had refused to submit. Though their numbers were few and their resources limited, they would not accept the Moorish domination of their homeland. This would set the stage for one of the most remarkable stories in medieval history: the Christian response to the Moorish conquest. And so, while the Muslim forces celebrated their swift and overwhelming victory, a quiet defiance grew in the north. The Christians would bide their time, gathering waiting for the moment to strike back. The Reconquista, the long and arduous fight to reclaim Iberia, had only just begun. From the ashes of Visigothic defeat, a new era of conflict and perseverance was about to rise, and it would be the Christians in the northern mountains who would eventually light the spark of resistance. Now, let us turn to the early stages of this response, the first stirrings of the Christian kingdoms that would, centuries later, change the fate of the Iberian Peninsula forever. In the rugged northern mountains of Iberia, where the land is wild and the terrain unforgiving, a spark of defiance flickered. The Moorish conquest may have swept swiftly across the peninsula, but here, in the isolated valleys and towering peaks, the seeds of Christian resistance began to take root. This was the birthplace of Asturias, a small but resilient kingdom that would ignite the long and difficult journey toward the Reconquista. Under the leadership of Pelagius, or Pelayo as he is more commonly known, a former noble turned rebel leader, the Christian forces found their first foothold against the Moorish advance. Asturias was no grand empire. In fact, it was little more than a mountain refuge, a sanctuary for those unwilling to submit to Moorish rule. But it was from this humble beginning that the Christians would begin to turn the tide. As historian Hugh Kennedy noted, from this small mountain refuge, Christian resistance would begin a slow but steady reconquest of the peninsula, and that reconquest began in earnest with a battle that would go down in legend, the Battle of Covadonga. In 722 AD, Pelayo and his small band of warriors faced an overwhelming Moorish force at Covadonga. Outnumbered and outmatched, the Christians stood their ground, fighting not just for survival, but for the survival of their faith and their land. In the narrow mountain passes, the Moors' numerical advantage was diminished, and Pelayo's forces struck with a ferocity that caught their enemies off guard. Against all odds, they emerged victorious. This battle, though small in scale, carried immense symbolic weight. It was a glimmer of hope in a dark time, a sign that the Moors were not invincible. As historian Stanley G. Payne puts it, Covadonga marks the true beginning of the Christian reconquest, a small victory that set the stage for centuries of warfare. From the embers of this victory, other Christian strongholds began to emerge in the northern reaches of Iberia. The kingdom of Leon rose from the ashes of Asturias, carrying the torch of resistance further south. Castile, initially a frontier county of Leon, would later grow into one of the most powerful Christian kingdoms on the peninsula. These early Christian realms were united by a shared goal: to reclaim the lands lost to the Moors. Yet they were also fiercely independent, often competing with one another for territory and influence. Despite these internal divisions, their shared sense of purpose kept the Christian cause alive. But while the Christians were slowly consolidating their power in the north, the Muslim-ruled Al-Andalus was beginning to show signs of weakness. What had once been a unified and formidable Islamic state Muslim factions grew, threatening the stability of the Moorish rule. The internal strife weakened their control, making it difficult to maintain their dominance over the vast territories they had once swiftly conquered. Particularly significant was the decline of the Umayyad Caliphate, which had been the central authority in Al-Andalus. As the Caliphate lost its grip on power, local Muslim rulers, known as taifas, began to carve out their own independent kingdoms. These taifas were often at odds with one another, engaging in conflicts that drained resources and left the once mighty Muslim forces vulnerable to external threats. As David Levering Lewis noted, the internal conflicts in Al-Andalus were as much a cause of the Christian advance as their own strength. The fragmentation of Al-Andalus created opportunities for the Christian kingdoms in the north. No longer faced with a united and powerful enemy, they began to make inroads into Moorish-controlled territories. These early gains were often small, towns and fortresses reclaimed one by one, but they were crucial steps in the larger struggle to retake Iberia. The Christian advance was slow, cautious, and at times uncertain, but it was steady. Even as the Christians began to push southward, they were not always victorious. The Moors remained a formidable force, and for every town or city reclaimed, there were others that remained under Muslim control. But the tide had begun to turn. With each battle, each victory, the Christian kingdoms grew bolder, their ambitions greater. The dream of a fully Christian Iberia no longer seemed like an impossibility. It was becoming a reality, albeit one that would take centuries to achieve. The resilience of the Christian forces, combined with the internal divisions within Al-Andalus, set the stage for a new phase of the Reconquista. The fragmented Christian kingdoms in the north were evolving, growing stronger, and forging alliances that would prove crucial in the battles to come. The Moors, once so dominant, were now facing an increasingly organised and determined Christian opposition. But the true turning point was still to come. As the Christian kingdoms solidified their hold on the northern territories, they began to look south with renewed ambition. The rise of powerful Christian realms like Leon, Castile, and Navarre in the 11th century would mark the beginning of a more aggressive phase in the Reconquista. These kingdoms, driven by both religious zeal and political ambition, would soon launch campaigns that would push the Moors ever further south toward the heart of Al-Andalus. And so, as we leave behind the early Christian response, we enter a new chapter in the history of the Reconquista. The stage is set for the rise of the great Christian kingdoms, forces that would not only reclaim their lands but reshape the very identity of Iberia. Let us now explore the 11th to 13th centuries, a time when the balance of power began to shift decisively in favour of the Christian forces, and the dream of a unified Christian Iberia moved closer to reality. By the 11th century, the tides of war on the Iberian Peninsula were shifting. The Christian kingdoms, which had long been fragmented and struggling against the dominant Reconquista in their favour, and at the heart of this transformation was a momentous event that marked a turning point in the long struggle, the fall of Toledo in 1085 AD. Toledo was no ordinary city. Once the capital of the Visigothic kingdom before the Moorish conquest, it held immense symbolic importance for the Christians of Iberia. To reclaim Toledo was to reclaim a part of their lost heritage, a city steeped in both Christian and Roman tradition. But Toledo was not just a symbol, it was also a strategic stronghold. Situated in the centre of the peninsula, it controlled vital trade routes and served as a gateway to the southern lands still under Muslim control. King Alfonso VI of Leon and Castile understood the importance of this city, and in 1085, after years of careful diplomacy and military pressure, he seized it. The capture of Toledo sent shockwaves throughout Iberia. Christian forces rejoiced, while the Muslim rulers of Al-Andalus were thrown into disarray. As historian Joseph F. O'Callaghan wrote, the capture of Toledo was not just a military victory, but a symbolic reclaiming of Iberian Christianity's ancient capital. The fall of Toledo marked a new phase in the Reconquista. No longer were the Christian kingdoms simply fighting for survival. They were now on the offensive, reclaiming their lost territories and reshaping the political landscape of Iberia. But this newfound success was not achieved by royal armies alone. A new force had emerged in the Christian world that would play a pivotal role in the Reconquista: the military orders. These were no ordinary knights. Combining the discipline of monastic life with the martial prowess of seasoned warriors, the military orders became powerful instruments in the Christian effort to reclaim Iberia. Among the most famous of these were the Knights Templar and the Order of Santiago, both of which took vows to defend Christendom and fight the Moors. The military orders were more than just fighters. They were also builders and settlers. As lands were retaken from Muslim control, the orders were granted vast estates, which they fortified and populated with Christian settlers. In this way, they not only defended the newly reconquered territories, but also helped to consolidate Christian rule. As historian Thomas F. Madden noted, the military orders became vital instruments in the expansion of Christian rule, combining monastic discipline with martial prowess. Their presence in the frontier zones made them crucial to the Reconquista's success, particularly in the more volatile and contested regions. Yet, for all their gains, the Christian kingdoms faced fierce resistance. From across the Mediterranean came a wave of Muslim warriors, determined to halt the Christian advance. The Almoravids, a powerful dynasty from North Africa, swept into Iberia in the late 11th century. Under their stern leadership, the Muslim forces in Al-Andalus were revitalized, and the Christians soon found themselves on the defensive once again. The Battle of Sagrajas in 1086 was one such moment of reckoning. Led by Yusuf ibn Tashfin, the Almoravid forces inflicted a crushing defeat to Al-Andalus that had been lacking in the decades before their arrival. For a time, it seemed that the Christians might be pushed back, that the hard-won victories of the previous decades might be undone. But the Reconquista was not easily derailed. Even as the Almoravid threat loomed large, the Christian kingdoms regrouped, biding their time and strengthening their forces. In the 12th century, another wave of North African warriors arrived, the Almohads, a new and even more zealous dynasty determined to restore Muslim dominance in Iberia. The Almohads, like the Almoravids before them, won significant victories, most notably the Battle of Alacos in 1195, where they routed the forces of Castile. For a moment, it seemed that Muslim supremacy had been restored, yet the Christian kingdoms, ever resilient, rallied once again. The tide finally began to turn in the decisive year of 1212, at the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, one of the most significant battles in the history of the Reconquista. The combined forces of Castile, Aragon, and Navarre clashed with the Almohads. The battle was fierce, but the Christian forces, driven by a sense of divine purpose and aided by superior tactics, achieved a monumental victory. This was a turning point. As Bernard F. Riley observed, the Almohad victory at Alacos briefly restored Muslim supremacy, but the Christian kingdoms soon rallied, culminating in Las Navas de Tolosa. The Almohad forces were shattered, and with their defeat, the Muslim hold on Iberia began to crumble. Las Navas de Tolosa opened the door for the Christian kingdoms to push further south, and in the following decades, they would begin to reclaim vast territories that had been under Muslim control for centuries. The 11th to 13th centuries were a time of transformation on the Iberian Peninsula. The Christian kingdoms, once small and fragmented, had grown into powerful realms capable of launching large-scale campaigns and forging alliances that spanned across borders. Leon, Castile, Aragon, and Navarre all played crucial roles in the Reconquista, each contributing to the long struggle to reclaim Iberia from Moorish control. Yet, despite their successes, the Reconquista was far from over. While much of northern and central Iberia had been reclaimed, the Muslim kingdom of Granada remained in the south, a final bastion of Moorish power. The Christian kingdoms, now stronger than ever, turned their eyes toward this last stronghold. What had once been a defensive struggle for survival had transformed into a full-fledged campaign for domination. As we reflect on the rise of the Christian kingdoms and their triumph at Las Navas de Tolosa, the stage is set for the next crucial phase of the Reconquista. With much of northern and central Iberia now under Christian control, the focus would shift toward the remaining Muslim stronghold of Granada. The once fractured Christian realms had evolved into powerful forces, united in their ambition to complete the long-sought goal of a unified Iberia. The final chapter of this epic struggle was about to begin. As the 13th to 15th centuries would witness the last great battles, the fall of Cordoba and Seville, and, ultimately, the conquest of Granada. Now we move forward into this decisive phase where the fate of the peninsula would be sealed. By the 13th century, the Reconquista was well underway, but the final chapter of this long struggle had yet to be written. While the Christian kingdoms of Castile, Aragon, and Navarre had reclaimed much of the Iberian Peninsula, one last stronghold of Muslim power remained in the south, the Kingdom of Granada. Nestled between the Sierra Nevada mountains and the Mediterranean Sea, Granada had become a refuge for the Moors, a bastion of Islamic culture, art, and scholarship, even as their influence elsewhere on the peninsula had dwindled. For more than 2 centuries, Granada stood firm, a glittering jewel of Al-Andalus, surrounded by Christian kingdoms. It was a city of stunning architecture, including the famed Alhambra, and a hub of intellectual and cultural exchange. However, Granada's days were numbered. By the late 15th century, it had become a vassal state, paying tribute to Castile in exchange for peace. The Christian monarchs, though, were no longer content with coexistence. The unification of Spain, under the powerful leadership of Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile, marked the beginning of the end for Muslim rule in Iberia. The marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella in 1469 was more than just a political alliance. It was the foundation for a unified Christian kingdom, with the military and economic resources to launch the final assault on Granada. Together they became known as the Catholic monarchs, and their shared vision of a fully Christian Spain became a driving force behind the conclusion of the Reconquista. With their forces united, Ferdinand and Isabella embarked on a decade-long campaign that would culminate in the siege of Granada in 1491. The fall of Granada was not just a military operation, it was a psychological blow to the remnants of Muslim power in Iberia. The Catholic monarchs carefully orchestrated the siege, surrounding the city and cutting off its supplies, while offering terms of surrender that seemed reasonable enough to avoid further bloodshed. After months of resistance, Granada's ruler, Boabdil, could no longer hold out. On January 2nd, 1492, he surrendered the keys of the city to Ferdinand and Isabella, marking the end of Muslim rule in Spain. The symbolic weight of this event cannot be overstated. As L.P. Harvey wrote, with the fall of Granada, the 700-year effort to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula for Christendom came to an end. For centuries, the Christians had fought to drive the Moors from Iberia, and now, with the surrender of Granada, their victory was complete. The Alhambra, once the seat of Muslim power and culture, was now in Christian hands, and the great cities of Al-Andalus fell silent under new rulers. But the end of the Reconquista was not a moment of sudden unity and peace. While the Catholic monarchs had successfully reclaimed Granada, the terms of its surrender would lead to simmering tensions that would shape Spain's future. The Treaty of Granada, signed in 1491, had initially promised religious tolerance for the Muslim population. Boabdil, the last Nasrid ruler, had negotiated terms that allowed Muslims to continue practicing their faith, to retain their customs, and to live under their own laws. For a brief moment, it seemed that the multicultural legacy of Al-Andalus might be preserved. However, this promise of tolerance was short-lived. Within a few years of Granada's fall, the Catholic monarchs, under the growing influence of the Spanish Inquisition, began to impose increasingly strict conditions on the Muslim population. Conversion to Christianity was demanded, and those who refused faced exile, persecution, or worse. The initial leniency granted by the Treaty of Granada gave way to forced conversions and the suppression of Islamic culture. By the early 16th century, the presence of Islam in Spain had all but vanished, its remnants buried beneath the weight of the Reconquista's final victory. Boabdil's departure from Granada is a moment steeped in legend. As he rode away from the Alhambra, it is said that he paused at a hill overlooking the city and wept for the kingdom he had lost. His mother, watching him from behind, is said to have uttered the famous words, "Weep like a woman for what you could not defend as a man." The hill became known as the Puerto del Suspiro del Moro, or the Pass of the Moor's Sigh. As historian Giles Tremlett remarked, Boabdil's tears as he left the Alhambra became a symbol of the end of an era, one that had shaped the cultural and religious landscape of Spain for centuries. It was a poignant end to nearly 800 years of Moorish presence in Iberia. With the fall of Granada, the Christian monarchs turned their attention to forging a new, unified Spain. The victory of 1492 was not just the end of the Reconquista, it was the beginning of a new era of exploration, expansion, and consolidation. The same year that Granada fell, Christopher Columbus set sail across the Atlantic, paving the way for the Spanish Empire's vast global reach. Spain, now united under Christian rule, would soon become one of the most powerful nations in the world. Yet the legacy of the Reconquista was complicated. While it marked the triumph of Christianity over Islam in Iberia, it also marked the loss of a vibrant, multicultural society that had flourished under Muslim rule. For centuries, Christians, Muslims, and Jews had coexisted in Al-Andalus, creating a society known for its intellectual achievements, its architectural marvels, and its unique blend of cultures. With the end of Muslim rule came the gradual erosion of this diversity, as Spain became increasingly focused on religious and cultural uniformity. The Reconquista also left behind a legacy of tension and conflict that would persist for centuries. The forced conversions of Muslims and Jews, the establishment of the Inquisition, and the growing power of the Spanish monarchy created a society in which dissent and diversity were often suppressed. While the Catholic monarchs had succeeded in unifying the done so at a cost. As we move forward, it's essential to consider the full impact of the Reconquista, not just the military victories, but the cultural, religious, and social changes that followed. The triumph of Ferdinand and Isabella in Granada was the culmination of centuries of struggle, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter in Spain's history, one that would see the rise of empire, the spread of Christianity, and the loss of the rich, diverse world that had once thrived in Al-Andalus. Now that the battles have been fought and the last strongholds reclaimed, we turn to the question of legacy. What did this 700-year conflict leave behind, and how did it shape the future of Spain and the wider world? In our next section, we'll explore the enduring impact of the Reconquista, tracing its influence from the unification of Spain to the dawn of the Spanish Empire and beyond. The legacy of the Reconquista is as multifaceted as the centuries-long conflict itself, leaving behind a profound impact on religion, culture, society, and the very fabric of the Iberian Peninsula. While the final victory in 1492 marked the end of Muslim rule in Spain, it also ushered in an era of significant change. Some of it celebrated, some of it painful. The unification of Spain under Christian rule came at a great cost, particularly to the Muslims and Jews who had once lived in relative harmony with their Christian neighbours. The Reconquista reshaped not only the Iberian Peninsula but the world, as Spain and Portugal prepared to launch themselves into the age of exploration, forever altering global history. Religiously, the conclusion of the Reconquista in 1492 was not merely about reclaiming land. It was about asserting Christian dominance and establishing a singular religious identity for Spain. In the years that followed the fall of Granada, the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, abandoned the promises of religious tolerance they had made in the Treaty of Granada. Muslims who had been allowed to continue practicing their faith under the terms of the treaty were soon forced to convert to Christianity or face expulsion. The same fate befell Spain's Jewish population. These forced conversions, known as the converso or Morisco conversions, marked a tragic end to centuries of religious coexistence. It was a dramatic shift from the Al-Andalus of the past, where Jews, Christians and Muslims had lived together in one of the most culturally vibrant regions of medieval Europe. While their coexistence was not without tension, it allowed for remarkable intellectual and cultural exchange. Under Muslim rule, Jewish and Christian communities had thrived, contributing to a flourishing society where advancements in science, medicine, philosophy, and the arts were made. But with the conclusion of the Reconquista, this diversity began to unravel. The Spanish Inquisition, established in 1478, became a powerful tool for rooting out heresy and ensuring religious uniformity. The forced conversions were policed by the Inquisition, which investigated and persecuted those suspected of secretly practicing their former religions. Many Jews and Muslims were subjected to trials, imprisonment and execution. As historian Henry Kamen observed, the Reconquista laid the groundwork for a unified Spain, setting the stage for the age of exploration and the spread of Spanish influence around the globe. The Christianization of Spain became a cornerstone of the empire that Ferdinand and Isabella would soon build. Just as the Reconquista came to a close, Columbus was setting sail for the New World, marking the beginning of Spain's rise as a global power. The zeal that had driven the Christian forces to reclaim their homeland was now channeled into exploration and conquest. Spain and Portugal, both fresh from centuries of conflict, emerged as dominant imperial forces, claiming vast territories in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. The Reconquista had not only shaped Iberia, but laid the foundations for an empire that would stretch across continents. Economically, the Reconquista also brought significant changes. As Christian forces reclaimed land from the Moors, they redistributed it among the nobility, military orders, and, crucially, the Catholic Church. The Church's role in the Reconquista had been both spiritual and material. It had provided the ideological justification for the war, framing it as a holy crusade, but it also gained vast tracts of land in the process. The Church emerged as one of the largest landowners in Spain, wielding immense economic and political power. This land redistribution also reinforced the feudal system, as large estates, or latifundia, were handed over to nobles who had fought in the wars. These estates were worked by peasants, creating a deeply stratified society in which wealth and land were concentrated in the hands of the elite. As historian Peter Linehan noted, the Church's role in the Reconquista not only enhanced its religious power, but also made it a major landowner, deeply intertwined with the politics of the emerging Spanish state. The close relationship between the Church and the monarchy would shape Spain's political and economic systems for centuries to come. However, this economic boon for the elite came at a cost to the lower classes. Many peasants, who had hoped for greater opportunities after the war, found themselves working the same lands they had before, only now under Christian rule. Feudal obligations remained, and the rigid social hierarchy of medieval Spain persisted well into the modern era. Yet, despite these sweeping changes, the Reconquista was not a monolithic, unified effort as it is often portrayed. It was a complex, multifaceted series of wars driven by a variety of political, religious, and personal motives. Modern historians challenge the romanticized notion of a singular Christian crusade against Islam. As Simon Barton argued, the Reconquista is often portrayed as a singular, cohesive Christian effort, but it was in reality a series of complex, often contradictory wars with shifting alliances. Christian kingdoms frequently fought one another, competing for territory, influence, and power. In some cases, Christian rulers even allied with Muslim leaders to achieve their own goals. was as much a patchwork of political opportunism as it was a religious crusade. This reality complicates the traditional narrative of the Reconquista as a purely religious conflict, while the struggle between Christianity and Islam was undoubtedly a central theme. The ambitions of individual rulers and the shifting dynamics of medieval politics played just as crucial a role. The idea of a unified Christian effort was, in many ways, a later invention, used to bolster the legitimacy of the Spanish monarchy and its imperial ambitions. As we reflect on the legacy of the Reconquista, it's clear that its impact was far-reaching. It not only reshaped the religious landscape of Spain, but also laid the foundation for its rise as a global power. Yet, it also marked the end of one of the most culturally diverse periods in European history. The Reconquista brought Spain and Portugal to the brink of empire, but it also closed the door on the unique, multicultural society that had flourished under Muslim rule. The scars of forced conversions, the Inquisition, and the loss of religious tolerance would leave their mark on Spain for centuries. With the Reconquista complete and the Christian kingdoms unified, Spain stood on the edge of a new era, one of exploration, conquest, and the establishment of a global empire. But as we look back on the triumphs and tragedies of this long conflict, we must also consider what was lost and what legacy remains today. In our final section, we'll bring this long and complex history to a close, reflecting on the enduring influence of the Reconquista and the lessons it leaves for us today. The story of the Reconquista is one of endurance, conflict, and transformation. It spans nearly 700 years, beginning in 711, when the Moors swept across the Iberian Peninsula, establishing their rule over much of modern-day Spain and Portugal. From that moment, the Christian kingdoms of the north began a slow, determined fight to reclaim their land. This struggle was not a single, unified effort, but rather a series of battles, truces, and shifting alliances that ebbed and flowed across the centuries. For almost 7 centuries, the balance of power shifted back and forth, with moments of peace followed by renewed conflict. The early phases of the Reconquista saw the Christian kingdoms of Asturias, Leon, and Castile push back against Moorish dominance. Over time, the rise of powerful monarchs like Ferdinand and Isabella would consolidate this effort. By the late 15th century, the Christian forces had retaken most of the Iberian Peninsula. The final chapter came in 1492, with the fall of Granada, the last Moorish stronghold. This victory not only marked the end of the Reconquista, but also the dawn of a new era for Spain and Portugal, as they turned their eyes toward exploration and empire building. The conclusion of this long struggle signalled the rise of Spain as a global power, ready to embark on the great voyages of discovery that would shape the modern world. The long-term impact of the Reconquista is visible everywhere, from the intricate architecture of southern Spain, where Moorish influence left also creating a unique blend of Christian, Muslim and Jewish cultures that remains evident today. The fall of Granada in 1492 also coincided with Columbus's first voyage to the Americas, linking the Reconquista directly to the era of exploration and colonialism that followed. It's astonishing to think that in the same year Spain completed its centuries-long battle to unify its kingdom, it also set the stage for a global empire. As historian Richard Fletcher so aptly put it, the Reconquista's enduring legacy is visible not just in the political map of Spain, but in the art, architecture and cultural memory of the Iberian Peninsula. From the towering Alhambra in Granada to the stunning cathedrals built on former mosque sites, the echoes of this epic struggle remain deeply embedded in the land and its people. In reflecting on this remarkable era, it's clear that the Reconquista was not just a military campaign, but a cultural and social transformation that left a lasting legacy. It shaped the destiny of nations and influenced the course of world history. I encourage you to think about how the echoes of this time still resonate in our modern world, how borders, identities and cultures are forged over centuries of struggle and coexistence. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the history of the Reconquista. If you enjoyed this video and want to dive deeper into other fascinating moments in history, please like, comment and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world, and I look forward to exploring more with